So this is the 12th and last of the draws for the Kasumi no Kata. As you can see, it is a 360-degree space clearing draw. It's called open and closing because it's about opening and closing the hip joints and moving the whole body by opening and closing the hip joints, rather than twisting or spinning from the belly or bracing against the floor. In this exercise here, you can see a slow version of the hip. The back hip joint opens, the front hip joint closes. That's what I mean by opening and closing, that movement. It's kind of linear. Its effects are circular, but the feeling inside the body is of a kind of linear movement. Your center is moving in a straight line and your hips are opening and closing, and the result is that you move, in that case, 180 degrees, and if you do it twice, 360. The beginning movement is a little bit more complex than that, but this opening closing here is largely what this form is trying to teach. It's a difficult and complicated lesson because we usually try and move from our hands or by bracing against the floor and twisting with our belly muscles and things like that, to just get into the hip joints and be making these small, powerful movements deep in the body which have large effects when it gets out to the extremities is important to spend time looking at. It has far-reaching implications when it comes to the generation of power and all kinds of movement. You'll notice with the draw that the actual drawing of the sword is largely identical to the first draw. You simply open the waki and then leave the sword directly in front of you with the point on your center line, more or less. You will note that you are in the shadow of the blade then. You are safe behind the back of your blade for the entire duration of that movement, which hopefully you've developed a sense for of how the safe places with relationship to your own blade. And so having taken that kind of position, you simply stay there and then do all of the rest of the movement from inside your hip joints or inside your chest once you get into the rest of the kata. Part of the reason for this is to do with something that I think Sensei once said, or it may have been one of my senpai, that if you are using the metaphors of like physics and gravity and momentum and so on, then there is a danger of being ridden by gravity rather than riding it, or being ridden by momentum rather than riding it. If you are riding momentum or gravity, you can get off once your purpose is accomplished. If gravity is riding you, then at the end of a movement there is a lot of slop or momentum or sloshing kind of forces inside your body. The same is true of centrifugal forces if you twist or spin. And so if you are moving lightly and you twist your body, when you come to the end of a movement, you will feel these kind of swirling momentums that unbalance you. However, if you are simply opening and closing the hip joints and simply moving the center of your body, then when you come to the end of a movement, there's a kind of quiet finish. You don't have as much slop in the body, as sloshing in the body. And you don't have to fight to keep your balance, or exert any kind of force to keep your balance. Generally speaking, I do this particular kata as often as I can, once a day sometimes, specifically because of that point. If I twist from my belly, if I brace my feet against the ground and twist my body around, then I always have to fight to keep my balance at the end of the movement. And the extent to which I only use my hip joints and my waki to pull the sword out, then at the end there is very little kind of sloshing inside my body from centrifugal forces or momentum. And that is a deep and complicated lesson that has far-reaching kind of implications and can be gone into at considerable depth. I have no reason to believe that I'm anywhere near even the middle of what can be done with that movement, or at least every time I've thought, I understand this, 6 months later I've found some other deeper thing, or some smaller movement which has the same effect, or some subtle shift in how I'm opening the hips, which means that the whole movement is both light and strong. It's a very, very deep and interesting practice that I strongly recommend. It's where I first began to understand personally what Sensei meant when he told me when I was a beginner that I shouldn't kick against the floor. I knew what the words meant and I thought I understood what he meant, but it was with this practice that I really could feel that if I braced against the floor or pushed against the floor, then the result in and at the end of the movement was that I had kind of lost control of the movement. I was like a bullet fired from a gun rather than a living thing which was in control of itself. And so I personally have found it to be an enormously useful practice. The opening and closing that I did at the beginning of this is how I often practice it too, simply opening backwards or forwards. I showed just opening backwards, like opening the hip back and then opening and closing and opening the other hip. But you can do it forwards. Forwards is what's classically known as entering, where you throw your leg forward from the waist and then open and close both hip joints. That's how we close distance. In the case of this kata, because the imagined use is that many people are closing distance with you rapidly, and so you wish to make space around you, then they are coming to you, so you don't need to open forward or to enter. But it's the same mechanism as is used for all kinds of entering movements, including in Kiryotoshi, which we will look at later, and in all of the jujutsu where you are closing space with somebody. So it's very much worth studying and practicing if you can. That is the end of the Kasumi no Kata. It's simple, it's fun, it's solo, unlike most itoryu. And to be honest, every time I learn something from kata, I have a tendency to come back and find it in the Kasumi no Kata, hidden somewhere. And consequently, I have great respect for this kata. Thank you.